everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. Today I am embarking on an exciting and ridiculous new project, the English Regency Court Gown. Now there's a group of us for Costume College this year who have decided that because the theme of the gala is Bridgerton, that we should bring to people's attention the style that Bridgerton really missed out on in its ridiculousness, and that is the English Regency Court Gown. If you are not familiar with English Regency Court Gowns, they look like this. Basically, they took the high waistline of the Regency period and they combined that with the fact that Queen Charlotte required that hoops be worn at court. So you have the peignets of the 18th century, those big side hoops that are combined with the high waistline for this really ridiculous and over-the-top effect. I have an entire video on English Regency Court Gowns, so if you want to go check out that video first, I will link that right up here and also down below in the description for you to watch, just to give you more backstory on what exactly this crazy fashion is and to see a lot more examples. But again, we have decided to actually make these for Costume College this year. However, as a lot of you probably know, I am on a very limited budget right now due to vet bills. And so I am determined to make this project either solely with my stash or by going up to maybe $100 max for this project, which, considering how many yards of fabric go into this project, that is a pretty tight budget. And ideally, I would love to do this entirely from the stash. However, I have been going through my stash and trying to find like yardages that are not already earmarked for other future projects, and I don't have that many, particularly ones that would actually work for this project, as in not plaid, because if you know me, you know I love my plaid silk. But unfortunately, plaid silk was not something that was ever used for English Regency Court gowns. And there are actually no surviving English Regency Court gowns because everyone knew that these styles were so ridiculous, they were only required at court, and most people probably had those dresses made into other more wearable dresses after wearing them at court because they were ridiculous. They weren't going to go out on the town in these dresses. So there's really only the fashion plates to go off of and a handful of other costumers who have already made English Regency Court gowns, and otherwise we're just kind of flying by the seat of our pants here. Now, I do already have a grand peignet, which you can see on the dress form back here behind me. But the grand peignets of this era were suspended from the shoulders because they had to sit up here instead of where they would want to sit down at your actual waist. So I do have to add some shoulder straps to my grand peignets, and likewise, although I have like 18th century petticoats, there is currently a petticoat on over this grand peignet. They're not really hemmed to go over my grand peignet. I think I just kind of went with it when I did my 18th century court gown and like didn't worry about the fact that the petticoat is like coming up here on the sides. B, they wind up being pretty short because the grand peignet has now been lifted another like 5 or so inches to the underbust. I'm probably still going to use said petticoat, but I am again going to have to add straps to it. I am also kind of toying with the idea of, with the peignet itself, if I need to add a bottom hoop to it. Right now I have a hoop that's about 1 foot from the bottom of my grand peignet and nothing on the actual bottom, and so all of those hoops are finishing right about here, which is a little above my knee, so it's a little bit high for hoops, you know, to be able to support and not get that effect where it comes in underneath the bottom hoop. So I may have to add another hoop as well as the straps. So we will be starting this project with some of those undergarment tweaks. I am going to be using my Regency corset for this because that's what makes sense to me. I think that they would have all been worn over Regency corsets because you have the typical very high Regency bust and not that 18th century conical shape. So I do already have one of those. I'm not going to be needing to make any tweaks to that. My plan with the straps on the Grand Peignet, just to make sure that they're really secure, and honestly probably with the petticoat as well, is to do a cross back so that the straps are crossing in the back and then coming over the shoulders. That way they hopefully won't fall off my shoulders. A lot of weight is going to be suspended from this. And honestly, I'm probably just going to use like a wide ribbon or maybe a twill tape if I have one, but I don't think I do. So probably a wide ribbon for the straps and just sewing those on to the petticoat and to the Grand Peignet so that we can get everything suspended at the right height. So that's obviously a very important base. If you didn't already have a Grand Peignet and you want to make a project like this, you're going to need to make one. But let's talk about the actual design ideas for what I have planned here. Now, because I am mostly planning to make this from my stash, we're kind of limited in what we can do. And there's a couple of different like design styles that you see the most in the fashion plates that exist from the English Regency Court gowns. And that is kind of like one of, I'd say, three things. So one style that you see is very Regency looking top, and like a lot of times even almost like a Spencer type top where you're seeing a different color that's just at the top and then the skirts are something completely different, and or a different color at the top that then trails down kind of in a straight line, kind of like this in the back, and you don't see that carried into the skirt at all. And then if you have that back drape, the skirt is either just like one solid fabric, or it's one solid skirt with kind of drapes over the top. So that's kind of one idea. Another idea that you see a lot is a bodice that like kind of is that short bodice, but then also has side poofs that are the same fabric of that, and those are kind of tucked up and over the sides of the Grand Peignet, so that's common. And then a common design motif that you see is a diagonal motif. So either you're looking at usually solid color fabrics, or a lot of times those skirts, especially if they don't have overskirts over the top, have a diagonal stripe to them. Usually it's a complicated stripe, like we're not talking about just lines, but lines that might have like squiggles and stuff within them. And that is a very common motif that you see on these. And I say common because we really only have about 15 fashion plates of these designs, and there's like 3 or 4 of them at least that have these diagonal designs on them. And then the last type of court gown that you see is a much more kind of a frou-frou and very light, airy Regency look, where you have what seems to be almost like sheer white fabrics that are pulled up and puffed in various ways over like usually a solid color fabric underneath. And this last type does tend to get a little bit smaller when we're talking about the actual size of the hoops. I think, I'm not sure because I don't know the years on all of these plates, but I think this may be a slightly later design, because this trend requirement is really the word. This was never a trend. This requirement lasted from the 1790s into even the 1820s. So it did last for quite a long time. It was just very, very niche. So again, I've been trying to figure out what I can do with the fabrics that I have with these types of designs. And so what I've come up with, this is one of the fabrics that I actually have quite a bunch of yards of, but is not earmarked for something else. I have 207 inches, I think, of this, which I haven't done the math on, but that's somewhere around 6 yards, I believe. And so that is enough for the skirt, because I measured around my Grand Peignet down here, and basically you need just about 5 yards for a skirt, whether you are going to be doing panels of your fabric across, or whether you're going to turn it sideways if you're, you know, the right height, which to me, I can only do that if the fabric is like 60 inches wide. But if you can turn it sideways, still, you're gonna need nearly 5 yards to get around a Grand Peignet of this size and not have the fabric be like tight to the Grand Peignet. You want a little bit of that excess fabric in there, of that kind of movement of the fabric. So I have enough of this fabric. However, right now it is just well, you're seeing it as a horizontal stripe. It's a vertical stripe fabric. I would love to figure out how to do like this plate right here where we can turn this diagonally, but I fear that if I do that, I then will not have enough of the fabric because I would have to like somehow join pieces together and then cut out my panels from it. And my brain is not comprehending that right now. If I can figure that out, or if I decide to just go with the horizontal stripe, I do have a couple other fabrics that I can pair with it to get that like red look where we have the red draping down. Now I do have just a solid red taffeta, which I got in the fabric district a few years ago, but technically this is earmarked for a project. It's earmarked for a project that I don't have the other fabric for, and it keeps getting put off. So I suppose I could grab from it. I also probably have more than I need for that project because I have quite a bit of this. I want to say I have 10 yards. The other fabric that I could use to economize a little bit better, I believe I have enough left. This is the red green shot du peony that I used for my Christmas bustle this last year. And I'm pretty sure that I have enough to do that sort of like Spencer jacket with long train, which I guess in a way is a form of police. I think that there's enough left in here, but I'm not sure. And to be honest, I do like this color combination, even with the shot, better with this sort of cream tan stripe in here. I like that better than the solid red, which I think is just, it's not quite fitting together with the solid red, and I think this one's a little better. And then there are two other fashion plates that I quite like that would involve buying fabric for kind of the base skirt, but I could do with other fabrics that I have in my stash. So it would be, yes, I'd have to buy some fabrics, but I wouldn't have to buy all the fabrics, and it would probably be easier, really. And one of those is this one right here. Now I posted this along with that other fashion plate and a couple others onto my Instagram just to like, you know, throw my ideas out there a couple weeks ago, and you guys were really loving this one. I think mostly because the moons on this. I do not like the sleeves on this, so I would not do an exact copy of this, but I happen to have this like sort of purpley gold striped silk taffeta right here, and I think I have enough to do like the Spencer police type garment. I think I have 2 1/3 yards of this. It is wide, but it's only 2 1/3 yards. So like right now, holding it at shoulder length, it does reach down to the floor and has about 4 or so inches on the floor. But that's not really the length of train that I would prefer. I would prefer a longer train. However, it's pretty close to the fabric in that plate. And I would pair that with a polyester, because I'm not buying more silk right now, a polyester in a cream that's either like a taffeta or a matte satin. Just as a stand-in, I do have a couple yards of this cream taffeta, which I don't have enough yards to make a full skirt out of, and I wouldn't want to waste nice fabric like this anyway. But this would be the color combo, the two right here. This is just very dark and a kind of a little heavy looking, so I don't know if I love it. And then the last potential one that I could do would be this one right here, which I love the sunshiny yellow of this plate. However, the fabric that I have is a golden yellow. It's really not that like lemon sunshine yellow, but I do have quite a bit of this. I think I have at least 7, if not more, yards of this. And so there's plenty to do this fashion plate. And then again, I would buy like the cream colored or maybe even slightly white colored poly taffeta or matte satin to go along with this for the skirt. And I might even buy some spangles and spangle the skirt and give a little extra effort, just because I think that that would be a neat addition. And then we'd figure out how to do like this leaf shape. I'm not positive how I would do that, but it's some sort of applique, and we'd cross that bridge when we get to it. But yeah, it would definitely be this golden yellow as opposed to the lemon yellow. So I don't know if it would be quite as nice, but I do really like this fashion plate. So basically those are kind of my 3 options. And I think I am going to post online to see if any of you have recommendations for how it would work to turn this sideways. And then I'm also planning to go to Joann's today and just see what they have as far as like an ivory matte satin, to see if that is even feasible or if we have to go with the stash type fabrics. So I'm going to go off to Joann's and I will let you know what we find and what our final design choice is going to be. So I went to Joann's and just did not come up with anything at all that was going to work. Part of the problem really is that the yellow that I have that I showed you guys, it's just not the right shade of yellow and it's not a great color on me. And so even like trying to combine that with like a polyester, it just wasn't working. So I am gonna go with the stripy one, and I have spent some time trying to figure out the math of like how to turn those stripes diagonal. And so let's go ahead and look at my diagrams and my math. I know, sorry for those of you who are not fans of math, but this did require a lot of it. Let's take a look at my diagrams and I'll show you how I figured out that this even is going to be feasible with as much fabric as I have. And as you can see, the final color story that we're going with is going to be the stripy skirt turned on its side so we get the angle, and then also the leftover from the Christmas bustle that is that red-green shot. It just looks a lot nicer with the tan stripy than the other red option. And then for sleeves and ruffles and stuff, I have this kind of, it's just barely off-white. It's basically white fabric with a gold metallic stripe through it. I'm pretty sure it is a poly or possibly a cotton poly blend. Actually, to be honest, it could even be a rayon cotton blend or maybe a rayon poly blend. It's kind of a lightweight semi-sheer fabric that I'd kind of had my eye on for a Regency dress, but then since it wasn't a natural fiber, I never used it. And I think it looks really nice all together and will do well for the sleeves and the ruffly bits along the bodice. So I'm going to attempt to quickly walk you through the math that I did, which was not a quick process for me at all. But basically, this is the fabric right here with the stripes running along the grain of the fabric. And I knew, or I figured out, that I needed to basically cut it into two triangles and then take this triangle and flip it down here, sewing the two together in between, like this is going to be the seam along with this to create a new rectangle that's going to be over here now with the stripes on the bias, and yes, with a seam that is also going across diagonally the length of the fabric. So then I kind of had to figure out like the angles and everything, and I did this by pinning the fabric and testing it. That was how I got my initial angle, Dora, really. And then these numbers are all of the numbers that I came up with because I knew I needed 160 inches to get around the skirt, like pleated into the waist, the hem, etc. And so that was my 160. That means that this needs to be 170 inches over here. And then the width of the fabric is 55, but that meant that this was actually going to turn into 57 inches. It's the dotted line. My eraser really sucked. So that was my initial line. Then I changed my angle just a little bit and that turned into 57. And this turned into a cat, really? So then I needed to find the rise over run basically because I couldn't just, so then I needed to find the rise over run so that I could break this line down a little bit. And that way, instead of being like 170 inches over 55, this then broke down to be every 36 inches of length here is 11.57 inches here. And so now I'm going to go draw my line across my fabric and cut it. Though that does leave me with one last dilemma, and that is where the stripes line up. So basically, I can make a seam right down the middle of this stripe if I want to give myself the every other, because these stripes, as you can see, are a little different. They're kind of reversed on what's on the outside. And if I sewed together both my fabrics here, I would have a big ugly seam kind of through the middle that would probably be hard to keep straight on either side. And then I would also be losing quite a bit of length here. And so I think what I'm going to experiment with is actually just attaching it like ½ inch to the edge, maybe even a little less than ½ inch, so that I basically wind up with another one of these stripes right here, but then I wind up with two of these next to each other. I feel like overall, it's probably still going to kind of blend in with this skirt. Hopefully, I mean, yes, they are different colors, but I'm hoping that it won't be too obvious. And if it is, I can always kind of take it in smaller, but it does mean that I would have less fabric to play with overall. So I have something very exciting to share with you, even though it's not going to be exactly how I'm doing the court gown. But while I was scrolling Pinterest yet again, just trying to find like anything similar to what this bodice shape is going to be so I would kind of know where to begin with the bodice, I found the fact that this, as you can see on screen, is actually from a book with a full description, and this dress was actually made. So let me just read you this description here. This is court dress, and it was originally from 1795, by the way, if I haven't said that already. So this is a description of the fashion plate. The hair in light curls and ringlets, chignon turned up plain, cap made of white crepe with gold spangles, the top of carmeline colored silk velvet, 2 white ostrich feathers placed on the left side, a diamond star in the front, and diamond pins around the cap. Lappets of point lace. Petticoat of white crepe, embroidered in gold foil and spangles, flounced with point lace and either beaded or headed, I think it's headed, with a white satin riband embroidered in gold, trimmed with gold tassels. Body and train of carmelite colored silk velvet with short sleeves and half full sleeves of white crepe with gold spangles, bound with gold lace, trimmed with gold tassels. The body laced with gold cord and the train trimmed with gold fringe. Sash of gold lace. Triple ruffles of point lace. Tippets of blonde, the outside of gold imitating fur. Diamond necklace and earrings. White shoes embroidered in gold. This dress was made by Madame Beauvais, or Beauvais, I can't speak French, milliner to Her Majesty. What? There is like a very, very little publication note underneath the plate itself, but it is far too blurry to read. I will link the plate with the full description, of course, down below in the description, so you can go read that for yourself. Obviously, I am not doing a lot of what it is saying in this plate, like the fact that I've chosen silk, actually it's dupioni, not even taffeta, instead of silk velvet. I don't have silk velvet, so we're gonna stick with that dupioni. And I still think I'm going to stick with the fabric that I showed you earlier for the sleeves instead of just doing like white crepe with spangles. I might add spangles, and actually that was another idea that kind of went into my head, because now we know that this is actually a white petticoat fully decorated over with spangles. We're not doing that. We are using this stripy fabric just because I have it. I don't have the white. But I had already been thinking of like, well, if I have time, right? I know, I never have time. If I have time, it would be cool to embellish the squiggly lines onto those stripes. And now the crazy part of my brain is saying, well, what if we can figure out how to machine sew those like string sequins where it's like one sequin all in a row, you know, just one after one after one, all strung together. What if we can figure out how to do that on the machine and get those S-curve lines out of string sequins? Because string sequins are not expensive. You can buy 100 yards of them from Amazon for about $10. Now I have no idea how many yards this might need to do every stripe with string sequins, but like that would be freaking cool. So that's just the harebrained idea in my head that I will get to maybe if I have time. But I thought that finding that passage in the book was really, really cool, and I wanted to share it with you, even though we are going to be cutting so many corners, we are basically left with a circle. Oh, and also, I don't know if you can tell back here, but her shape, and yes, I haven't actually cut the fabric yet, I need to, but the shape, it's a lot more pronounced, right? Hip-wise, and that is because I took my pocket hoops and I stacked them on top of the grand peignet underneath the petticoat, and it's giving me the shape I want. So I think I'm actually gonna do that. I might have to like safety pin them in place or something just so that they don't like shift around separately from the grand peignet. But yeah, that looks way better. So I'm gonna go with it. So I did actually decide to match the pattern because I just wanted it to blend more seamlessly. It did mean that I lost a little bit of length down here, I think about 4 or 5 inches, but look how nice this looks. This is the seam. Right? So it's coming at this angle and you can see where it's matching up on the stripes. I know we're very shadowy down here, but it's just continuing all along that stripe so that it really just blends in right along the edge of this kind of goldish stripe right here. And then I also managed to perfectly match up the stripes across the center back seam. I did decide to do this with just one single center back seam as opposed to two side seams like you would see earlier in the 18th century. I just figured that this would be easier to put onto straps that way. So I have my opening here. Basically, I just left the top 8.5 inches open, and then now this part up here, the waist is going to get pleated up to probably like a strip of bias tape or ribbon or something like that for the waistband just to fold it over. And that means it'll be like really low profile, but I think that'll work fine. And then there will be straps applied at the top of this. So let's go pleat. But look at that matching. So I have pinned all of the pleats in place on the skirt waist, but it is really apparent with skirts of this style that you need to do a lot of the leveling of the hem actually from the waist. So basically this center part winds up kind of coming up higher because of the huge extensions over the hips instead of just evening everything out at the hem. Because if you don't do that, if you don't kind of pull up that center, the skirt actually kind of wants to like tuck itself underneath, down underneath the grand panier, and so that's kind of what was happening. But I don't really know where all of this like sits on me as far as how long it needs to be, hem, etc. So I think it's time to actually like put stuff on. I'm probably going to go ahead and baste these pleats in place first, just so I don't have to worry about the pins falling out. So I'll just quickly baste those on the machine. And then I also am going to stick the straps both onto the panier in the back and also onto the petticoat in the back and get those set where they need to go in front so that I can like pin them in place while I'm wearing them. One other thing that I did do that I haven't talked to you at all about is that I actually took basically all of the rest of my skirt fabric and I cut it into strips because there's a ruffle around the bottom of the skirt. So I cut pretty much as wide as I could based on also scaling like what I would need. I think my scale math was that I would need something like a 4.75 inch ruffle, maybe 4 7/8. I can't quite remember, but basically with how much fabric I had left, I was able to cut 5 5/8 inch wide ruffles, and that also includes the hem that I have to turn and also the seam allowance. So there is just about enough of this for a 2-to-1 ruffle ratio around the bottom of the skirt. So once I do figure out, you know, the hem, the leveling, etc., then that can get put on to the bottom, but that's going to be a little bit because I think it's pretty much time to try everything on. And that kind of brings me to foundational garments. I know at the beginning of this video I had mentioned like, yes, that I would wear this over a Regency corset, and for some of the later designs for court gowns like 1800s, 18 teens, that all makes sense. But when I look at this fashion plate right here, this to me shows A, a little bit lower of a waist actually than we see later in the Regency, and B, kind of that like conical prow front look, which to me is very much like, no, we're wearing late stays. We're wearing either a transitional stays or we are wearing as close as I can find to transitional stays. And although I do not have transitional stays, and I thought about making them, but there's not really many patterns for like what I would want to achieve that shape. What I do have is some stays that I had actually won from a stay maker several years ago that never fit right. They fit me a lot more like transitional stays. So I think that that's actually going to work. They're like a little bit too short-waisted. They do tend to be very prow front. They're also a little bit large, so I'm not really going to get any reduction, I don't think. But I think that's what I'm going to use as my structure layer under all of this. And that will also let me have that waist that's like not fully here, but it's also not like at my natural waist here. You know, it'll be that kind of midpoint like this fashion plate. So I'm going to get all of this basted in place, the straps sewn in place in the back, and we're going to go put on my stays and put on all of that and see how all of this goes with the hem. So this looks totally and completely ridiculous. And these I feel like on me versus on the dress form, they're sitting a little bit farther back, and maybe that's just because I haven't put the petticoat on top of them to kind of hold them in place. They're going to have to be like affixed, I think, in some way, whether that is like a little pin, maybe a few pins, but yeah, I do feel like they are what's going to give the better silhouette, because then it gives the added boost there. I do also think though that I need to tie the ties that are inside these grand paniers a little bit tighter so that it goes more like this as opposed to like that, because I think right now we're a little bit like wide front back as opposed to wide side side, like the proportions just not quite there. But yeah, this is the undergarment combination. We've got the like ill-fitting things that are supposed to be regular stays but work decently as transitional stays, and then the like suspender strap grand pannier here. Right now it's just pinned in place in the front, and I do wonder if it is maybe slightly too high, but I think I'm still gonna sew it where it's at, because once we add all of the fabrics and everything, it will kind of wind up, you know, compressing and sinking down a little. And then we've got the pocket hoops on top. Obviously nowhere am I going to have functional pockets despite being this wide, because I won't be able to get my hands up and into. That was why I decided to put the closure in the center back, because there's no point in me having pocket slits anyway when I literally can't bend my arm in that way to access a pocket slit that is underneath my armpit. So yeah. So anyway, that's what that looks like. I'm gonna put the petticoat on over all of this now and get those straps pinned in place so that I can sew them, and then we'll see what the skirt might look like on top. So it's actually not nearly as long in the front as I thought that it was going to be, like where it is over the hips. Now, granted, I actually did not pleat the waist tight enough, so I can't show you because I just don't have that mobility, but there is a lot of gappage in the back right now where I have to clearly pleat this a lot tighter. But as you can see, I've kind of folded up the waist here a little bit, and so that is the excess that needs to get cut off in the front, and it's literally just like that very front bit there, because otherwise the hem is doing fairly decently. I mean, it's not even, but it's close. And then yeah, I do need to pleat that up before I can actually do anything more with the hem. And somehow I want to try and do that while I'm still wearing all of the undergarments, because they're kind of a pain to get all of the different layers on with everything. I don't know if I'm going to wind up using the pocket hoops on top. I feel like they kind of disappeared when I put the petticoat on, but I'll bet that it would look even more, you know, less square. It would look less exaggerated here if I did not have those pocket hoops on top of the grand pannier. And then yeah, I definitely need to get this like tighter front to back with the strings inside. So on the plus side, my diagonal looks really nice. So I cut off the top of the waist, so the waist is now set. I didn't do it in the back because I want the back to be longer, so I think that it still works. And now I can bind this over with double fold bias tape and put straps on this layer as well. There is still going to be some hemming at the hem, by the way. I decided I might as well pin the hem while I'm at it. So hem is pinned, the ruffle is going to be 1/2 inch longer than the current hem. I decided to make my waistband out of a piece of folded over grosgrain ribbon. So it just looks like that. That way it has no stretch whatsoever instead of bias tape, which does have that little bit of stretch. And then as you can see, I've also added my grosgrain ribbon straps to this skirt as well as to the petticoat and hoop, which are, you know, on the floor. And now I'm going to press up the hem that I had pinned up earlier. And this one, because it's going to get covered by the ruffle, I am going to do this hem on the machine. So I have the ruffle all hemmed and prepped here with the gathering stitches. I haven't pulled up most of the gathering stitches. It's mostly all just in a pile, but I have gone through, before I did the gathering stitches, I went through and I marked this into sections of eighths, like 1/8 per. And that way I can take those marks and match them up to the skirt. But what I'm trying to figure out right now is what sort of trim I want to go over this. So I have had this beaded trim in the stash for ages and ages and ages. I don't remember how or why I even got it. I think it was something at Costume College, maybe Bargain Basement or something like that. And I was like, okay, well, it would kind of work. I mean, these are purple, not red, and these ones are gold, it would kind of work to like put that on here, but obviously only if something is covering this edge or if this is like within the seam allowance. But it's also just kind of a short beaded sort of motif. Like putting this on here, it's just that tiny little bit up at the top of this, and then it's just kind of plain. And even if I were to layer it with like another gold braid, it just wasn't quite doing it. And so then I was like, okay, well, I want something sparkly, basically. I'm still toying with the sequin idea, which, by the way, one of the sequin colors that I ordered has arrived. I don't think it's the right color. This one was the champagne one, I believe, and I think it is just like too peachy for what I'm going for with this fabric. The next one that should arrive tomorrow is a little bit more like, I don't know, less rosy, basically. And I'm hoping that that one will work better. And I also am debating about ordering one that's just plain gold, because here's the next thing. I was like, okay, well, I have this trim in my stash. Let's see what this would look like. I feel like it might be too bright, but actually it's really freaking pretty, and it just sparkles so much. Like, I don't know if you can tell just how sparkly this is. It's really quite beautiful. Naturally, I went online and I basically can't find it. I found one supplier in China for like $6 a yard and would get here middle of June, but that's it. So yeah, I really, really like that though. So I did go on Amazon and I found a couple that might be similar-ish that I'm hoping might work, that can all get here like this week. So I think I'm going to try some of those. I like ordering trims off Amazon because they can always be returned if they don't work out. And they usually are in bulk. Like you can get 5 yards for like $20, which is really, really great, unlike this one. So yeah, unfortunately I only have like about 1 yard of this. Again, no idea why I have this. I'll bet it was like a clearance closeout at Joann's one time and I bought it because I don't think I've ever used this on a project. Maybe that was bargain basement too. I don't know. So anyway, I think I might actually hold off on applying this because basically my thought process was, as you know from before, I did cut this a little shorter than I wanted to because I didn't have enough fabric. So if I can apply this flat, as in not have to fold in the seam allowance like this, then this ruffle kind of becomes a little bit wider, but I can obviously only do that if I can cover over the seam or the area up here with some sort of trim. That said, honestly, even with like a lace, you can kind of see it through a little bit in the gap. So I should probably just do this right sides together and let it fall down and just put this on and then figure out the trims later. The ruffle is all attached to the skirt now. I have not pressed it in place, but it is attached. And with that, week 1 on this project is complete. I did get 2 other things in the mail this morning, potentially for this project, so I will show those to you really quickly, even though neither of them are going to work. But basically, I got one of the other shades of sequins, which was meant to be beige. I'm sure that you are also seeing green here because that's what I'm seeing. Even the thread is green. So yeah, not gonna work. The champagne is still the best bet, but I do have just like gold coming, so we'll see if that works. I don't know if the whole concept of putting these sequins on is even going to work at all, but whatever. And then I did get one of the other potential trims. Unfortunately, it's really an antique gold, which is too bad because I love the little stars and moons. Like, I know that it's probably not remotely historically accurate, but that other dress had all those moons on it, so I thought it was kind of a neat nod to that dress. But you can see the color difference here in like the brighter gold of the yard or so that I had in the stash versus the antique gold. So this is actually going to get returned back to Amazon, unfortunately, but I am definitely going to bookmark this for maybe some future project because it is really cute. And I think this whole like 5 yards was, I want to say like $13, so like not bad at all. I just don't have a use for it right now with the color not working. I don't know, I'll probably hang on to it until like the other potential ones come. I think I ordered 4 potential trims from Amazon, and so we'll see how this compares. Maybe I'll talk about that more in the next video. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. If you like this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon, and if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, like the rest of this project, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube at least once a week, with sewing vlogs out on Tuesdays and sometimes additional content out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please just go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks or join my YouTube channel memberships right here on YouTube below the video. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Jean, Dan, and Kim. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!